Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for this joint webinar which has been organised by SAIM's Overseas Territory Special Interest Group and the Marine Conservation Society. We have lots of exciting talks lined up for you today, but before I hand over to Mike Barker from the Overseas Territory Special Interest Group, I just wanted to mention that we will be looking to answer questions from you all after each talk. There'll be a couple of minutes. So please could you submit your questions via the Q&A box, which can be found on your toolbar, and we will read these out to the presenters. There is also a chat box, so please do feel free to use this to add any extra information that you would like to share with other attendees. Okay, well that's it from me, and without further ado, I will now hand over to Mike Barker. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Christy. Hi everyone, really glad you could join us for this webinar. This is one in a series of webinars that the SAIM Overseas Territories Special Interest Group's been organising this year, and it fulfills one of the key roles that the interest group has, which is to act as a forum and as a hub to bring together people who are interested or working in the overseas territories so that they can share information and experience and hopefully good practice. So today we're going to be looking at marine management challenges, and particularly around the context of how that works given COVID-19. And we've got 7 presentations for you, including one from Amdeep from the Marine Conservation Society, and he's going to kick us off right now. Now, in terms of the presentations, they're about 5 or 8 minutes long. There should be enough time for a couple of minutes of questions after each short session. So if you want to, please do use the question box to ask questions. Thanks very much. And Amdeep, over to you.
Thanks, Mike. And thank you, everybody. Good afternoon and good morning for those that are joining across the pond. And I'd just like to say thank you to SAIM, as well as our Caribbean OT representatives for helping to put this webinar on, as well as those that are joining. And I think at the beginning, it's good to talk a bit about the purpose for this webinar. Now, we've all felt the massive effects of COVID-19 on our nations, and certainly this is true also for the Caribbean OTs. You know, majority of their economies are tourism-based, as well as fisheries providing necessary livelihoods for communities. So with COVID, with tourism numbers having ground to a halt, and local communities, fishing communities having not been able to fish as regularly, there's been real pressure. And with these islands so dependent on their marine space, this whole session really is giving a platform to the Caribbean OT representatives, understanding what their challenges are with marine management under COVID, what their priorities are. And really, we're looking for this to connect people to the Caribbean OTs, understand the issues at hand, and to generate really useful information that can be used to help our partners in the OTs tackle these issues. But first, I'm just going to give you an overview of Marine Conservation Society's work in the Caribbean OTs. So for those that are joining and that are new to the term UK Overseas Territories, there's 14 of them globally. They've got a constitutional link to the UK, but they don't actually form part of it. And today we're going to focus on those territories in the Caribbean. So Cayman Islands, Turks and Caicos Islands, British Virgin Islands, Anguilla and Montserrat. And I'm sure the presenters after me will be able to tell you a whole lot more than I can. But having visited quite a few of these territories, they really are varied, very distinct places in terms of their cultures, their demographics, their economies, and as well as their marine issues. And also fascinatingly enduring places as well. I really recommend you go and visit. So MCS, we've been working with partners in the Caribbean OTs since 2002, and that was really looking to assess turtle fishery management in the Caribbean OTs. After this study, we were then invited by the Turks and Caicos Islands government to do a full assessment. Now, the gentleman on the left-hand side of your photo is Gilbert Jennings, a renowned turtle fisher from Turks and Caicos, and the gentleman on the right is Luc Claveau, who is Chief Enforcement Officer for the Department of Environment and Coastal Resources in TCI. And so this partnership really was working with fishing communities and local government to update information on the status of sea turtles in the Turks and Caicos Islands, but also using stakeholder engagement tools to really factor in the views and concerns of local fishing communities. So the resultant management plan would respect conservation needs of turtles, but also the rights of Turks and Caicos Islands to harvest resources. And really this project was quite successful. We had a lot of good feedback from the fishing communities in Turks and Caicos, as well as the government. And from this platform, we've been able to expand our work to the other Caribbean OTs. And from species specific, we're now looking at marine protected areas. So that's where our focus is going to turn now. So our vision for MPAs in the Caribbean UK territories is that they are functioning and well managed by marine managers who are sufficiently resourced. And this is a 3-year role that's generously funded by the John Elliman Foundation. And it started in 2019, and I was lucky to be recruited for this role. And it's essentially me, my manager, Dr. Peter Richardson, that are working on this project. And really, its aims are really to support local government departments and marine actors in the Caribbean OTs to improve MPA management. And there's lots of different elements to this role, but obviously first I had to develop trust and working relationships with the Caribbean UCOT MPA managers. And I'm happy to say that this is developing very well, and I'll talk a bit about that later on. Also, I've been working with the MPA managers in the Caribbean OTs to understand and establish what those key MPA priorities are. And this has mostly come in the form of a report, which I'll talk a bit about later. The role is also looking to develop and implement collaborative MPA projects, trying to enhance UK UCOT expertise. And it's also looking to facilitate information and also knowledge regarding Caribbean OTs. And I suppose this webinar is a perfect example of that. And it's also working with UK government agencies such as the FCO and DEFRA to support Caribbean UCOT MPA management. So that's basically the role in a nutshell. And so I'm just going to talk a bit about the work that we've been doing since 2019 with our partners in the Caribbean OTs. So the first thing that I really needed to do was to get a handle on the status of MPA management in the Caribbean UCOTs. And we did this through a comprehensive report, which had a lot of feedback and critique from partners across the Caribbean OTs. A lot of them are on this, are presenting today. So yeah, we really appreciate that. And thank you very much. And there's 82 marine protected areas that are designated across the Caribbean UCOTs, and some of them have been designated since the 1980s, and they're designed to protect some of the most fragile and diverse ecosystems in the regions. So this includes seagrass beds, coral reefs, mangrove forest, and coastal wetlands. And they are home to an incredible array of marine species, including threatened turtles, sharks, rays. They also provide foraging, nesting habitats for seabirds, and they also provide habitats for commercially fished species such as the queen conch and Caribbean spiny lobster. However, these MPAs are under a lot of stress, and I'm just going to talk a bit about the threats now. So one threat that we've obviously seen across the Caribbean OTs to MPAs is overexploitation, and this can come from inshore fisheries as well as illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing as well. And this seems to be an issue that's affecting all territories, with TCI having quite a significant amount of IU, and I'm sure our colleague Kathy Lockhart will talk about that later. Another threat is insensitive developments, and an example of that is the Cayman Islands. There's a proposal to create a new berthing facility for the cruise ships, and that would, there's potential for that to degrade the coral reef habitat adjacent to it. Now, I believe that this development has been shelved till next year due to the government's putting all efforts into the COVID response, but it's still an existing threat. Threats also include invasive species. So obviously you've got the Indo-Pacific lionfish as well as an invasive seagrass that's outcompeting native seagrass species. You've got pollution too, and this comes in the form obviously of marine plastics, but also fishing gears and net and fish traps that can also damage habitats. But a huge threat that's really been evolving over the years has been climate change and the effects of extreme weather events on not only the natural habitats of the Caribbean OTs, but also the communities too. And we obviously remember those devastating hurricanes that passed through Anguilla and the British Virgin Islands and TCI in 2017, Hurricane Irma and Maria. And this just highlights the vulnerability of Caribbean UCOT communities to this ever-growing threat. And also last year, fresh in our memories, Hurricane Dorian, which just passed over the Turks and Caicos Islands and devastated Bahamas. You know, it's a real issue, and the evidence suggests that these storms are looking to get more frequent and stronger as we go on. Now, the management of MPAs are essentially national responsibilities by the territory governments, but they are also constrained to varying degrees. And this is obviously by no means exhaustive, but limited staff and a lack of financial resources results in those key marine management aspects being jeopardized, such as scientific data collection, enforcement and monitoring, and also legislation too. And really what's happening is with these constraints and these threats, you're getting slow degradation and hampered management of these MPAs, which is leading to reduced opportunity, viability and sustainability of the blue economies that these islands rely on, mostly being tourism related and fishing too. However, there are positive developments as well, and these are happening all across the Caribbean OTs, but just because of time, I'm just going to pick on a few here. So in the Cayman Islands, there's an MPA enhancement plan, which I'm sure Tim will talk about, and I believe that this will increase the percentage of no-take coverage in inshore areas from 16% to 48% to increase resiliency. And this is a fantastic achievement. I know there's been some issues with it getting passed, but this is huge. And Anguilla as well, along with the government, Anguilla National Trust and local stakeholders, they're now starting to develop site-specific MPA management plans for their MPAs. But with this, there's still a clear need to improve MPA management in the Caribbean UCOTs to build environmental, economic and social resilience in the face of this changing climate. So I'm quickly going to talk a bit about the Great British Oceans Coalition that I represent MCS on, and it's made up of 6 conservation organisations, And essentially, we work with the UK government on the Blue Belt Initiative, which is all about enhancing marine protection across 4 million square kilometres of marine environment across the UCOTS. And so last year, I was part of the organising committee for the Blue Belt Symposium, which was all about assessing the first phase of the Blue Belt with respect to large-scale MPAs across the Blue Belt territories. I was also able to get the Caribbean UCOT representatives there, and with the FCO, we co-hosted a meeting the day after the symposium, and it was all about trying to understand the marine management challenges that the Caribbean UCOTs are facing. And we were able to get representatives from all but one of the territories there. And it was a fantastic meeting. It got people to meet face to face and start to understand these issues. And I know this is a lot of information, but here are the challenges that were documented per territory from that meeting. And so, you know, there were very clear cross-cutting issues. So, for example, a lack of scientific data on in-water habitats was an issue. Also, human and financial resources was hampering territory governments too, as well as illegal fishing as well. So basically, you know, after this meeting, this information was documented and submitted to all partners, including our partners in the FCO and the Blue Belt delivery team. And a couple of weeks later, the UK government made the announcement that it was to extend the Blue Belt scheme for 1 year by giving £7 million extra funding. And of that, I believe 2 million would be going to new territories, including the Caribbean. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, this meeting directly influenced this, but I think it does show you the value of people coming together to understand the issues, to generate information and the influence that it can have. And obviously, the challenges in the Caribbean now are going to be affected by COVID. So I'm hoping this meeting, we can really build on this initial meeting we had last year and try to update the priorities in respect to that. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amdeep. That was really interesting. And I couldn't help but notice that despite saying that isn't it great to do webinars and bring people together remotely and virtually, actually the benefit of getting everybody in the same room and having that face-to-face time, and it's really good to see the FCO providing funds to facilitate that sort of thing. I don't have any questions particularly, and I can't see any on the open question and answer session. So has anyone flagged any on the chat? I didn't see any there either. So we are running slightly over already. So perhaps there will be time for some questions at the end. So perhaps if we can hold any questions until then and move on to the next speaker, which is Timothy Austin from the Cayman Islands government. Over to you, Timothy.
Thanks very much, Andy, Mike, and Christy for organising this. Hopefully you can all hear me. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay. So thanks. Yeah. Good morning to my colleagues this side of the ocean, and good afternoon to those on more distant shores. My name is Tim Austin. I'm the Deputy Director with the Department of Environment, which is the agency that looks after our marine protected areas in Cayman. Got a quick presentation for you today, a map. Andy's already shared a map for those of you maybe not familiar with us. We've got the 3 islands, represent a population of about 65,000 people. The 2 smaller islands, about 90 miles away. Visitors each year would get approximately 2 million visitors, split roughly 3/4 of that with cruise ships, and 1/4 of that is air arrivals. But as you might imagine, we don't have any at the moment. And also presently a lot of the expat workforce has been sent home. I couldn't find a realistic number about what that is, but I would imagine it's in the range of between 5,000 to 10,000 people, which means we're down to a population of probably about 50,000 to 60 at the moment. Quick history of COVID. So on the 29th of February, our so-called patient zero, an Italian cruise passenger, was brought off a cruise ship for a medical emergency not related to COVID. Subsequently, turned out he did have COVID, and people in Cayman started to be detected. By the 13th of March, government had stopped all cruise ships entering the island. By the 22nd of March, our borders were shut for international air travel. And by 24th of March, things started to tighten in Cayman. We had nightly curfews. And then by the 28th of March, it was a shelter-in-place situation. We were all sent home from work. Businesses were forced to close, and the island's economy was basically brought to a standstill. Shortly after that, boating, fishing, and in-water activity were no longer permitted. So all marine activities were prevented. So there was no fishing going on, which at that time sounded like a local a benefit for the environment. But subsequently, it resulted in some areas of problems, which I'll get into later. Coronavirus, we've been spared quite well, really. The government's reactions have been quite effective. So we've got a confirmed 187 cases as of Friday. But most of the people have recovered. We have the one death, which unfortunately was the Italian cruise ship passenger that came ashore. But largely people are asymptomatic in Cayman. Hopefully that's to do with lifestyle. Government's been very effective with testing. We had nearly a quarter of the population tested, so 17,000 people tested. And so, as I say, COVID is not really a massive health issue at the moment. As a result of the closures, our DOE staff, a lot of people were deemed essential. Some organizations, mostly government, police, people you might imagine, were deemed essential, and they were spared from the COVID stay-home orders. Luckily, our DOE conservation officers, the people that patrol the marine protected areas, were deemed essential, so they were able to continue patrolling, although they were also drafted in to help with curfew violations, so they were patrolling both for us and for the police. Interestingly, poaching was still a problem. We were still finding people going out poaching individuals. But there was an added benefit. The breach of a curfew violation was a much more significant penalty than breaching the marine conservation law or the regulations. So that became a bigger deterrent as time went on. So poaching gradually got less as people realized that on-the-spot fines were going to be much more significant. And that was quite an important lesson that we've learned. Our other 35 staff who weren't involved with the kind of enforcement side of things were not deemed essential, so we were sent home. You can imagine that the logistics of running an office remotely, all of you have probably been through that. We're quite well resourced at our department, so we were able to relocate our computers to our houses, relying on the usual things like Zoom and online meetings. So that was proved relatively good. We got a lot of technical data that needs to be worked on, so people were working on reports, updating data analysis, and that kind of work that could be done from home. There were elements of our staff that couldn't work from home. Obviously, our operations staff, which would usually look after boat maintenance, do the dive moorings, marine park signs, all the kind of physical management, they were kind of limited in what they could do from home. We had some recruitment issues because we were recruiting people at the time. We've got 2 vacancies at the moment, and obviously recruitment, when you can't interview people easily or put them through some trials, was relatively difficult. Fortunately, the government seems fairly well equipped to keep things going. So at the moment, there's no immediate redundancy threats within our department, and certainly payroll has been continued, which is encouraging. But perhaps I'll move now to the area. Our biggest impact for our department, certainly in the marine protected areas, was the marine resource monitoring interruptions. Our long-term coral reef monitoring, which has been going since 1997, we were unable to get out and do that. That's hopefully been shifted to the later in the year, but we still don't know. We have an international collaboration with UK students, primarily Bangor University, who come out to help us collect our annual surveys. We use MSc students, and because of the fact that the schools and universities in the UK are closed, that's been cancelled. We're trying to think of ways around it. We may end up collecting the data and still outsourcing it to those individuals in the UK to write up, but we're working around that problem. Other significant programs, we have a local shark program which is with the UK-based Marine Conservation International. That was scheduled for April. We've had to reschedule it for September, but we can't actually confirm that because we can't book any flights or do anything related to kind of really getting it organized. We have a stingray survey with the Guy Harvey Ocean Foundation. That was interrupted, unable to do that, although we may be able to shift that. Annual queen conch stock assessment. We get in the water, try to assess how many conchs we got left, but again, on hold. Coral nursery work requires a lot of in-water cleaning of the nurseries with the local dive companies. No one's been allowed in the water, so we don't know what the fate of those are. And then, of course, turtle nesting season began in May. And this is a big program for us, relying a lot on volunteers who walk the beaches for us, because there's quite a lot of work to do, but unfortunately volunteers, and then nobody was allowed on the beaches. They had shut the beaches, which is very contentious here in Cayman. But moving more to the kind of the marine resource, fishing pressure was a very significant issue for us. And when they shut down the fishing, we kind of thought, well, we're going to get a bit of a break. And everyone thought we'll get a break. But honestly, the pressure to resume fishing by the local population was absolutely immense. Picture of a guy protesting. So fishing pressure was brought up. And eventually the government capitulated and they did allow people to go fishing. So you were allowed to go fishing, but you from shore and also from a boat. And that was the only reason you were allowed to go out on the water. The only reason you could go out on the water was to go fishing. So subsequently, we had loads of people who, with time on their hands, that were suddenly interested in fishing. And people would not normally fish going out to go fishing. So they were going to kind of like a recruitment drive for fishing. There are obviously people needed to go fishing for either to supplement their income because they'd lost it. We'd lost a lot of the tourism jobs, or they needed food, or they just had plenty of time on their hands and they wanted something to do. We've also had people, the conch seasons, we have conch seasons in Cayman, and they closed. And while people were sheltering in place and couldn't get out to get their conchs, they're now thinking that that time should be given back to them and that we should amend the conch seasons so that people can go out and get the time they missed. The government hasn't taken this up yet, but we're expecting that that may well be an issue. Other areas that we've been struggling, we rely a lot on kind of sponsorship from the public and people that like to raise money to support environmental initiatives. And this year we had a program which just basically the individual wasn't happy to keep going because he felt that this time of COVID relief was a higher priority. And so we think that funding when people are focusing on people's humanitarian relief is probably going to be and should be a priority. So a lot of our local programs may suffer as a result of that. Some silver linings to the COVID cloud. We weren't allowed to monitor the beaches, but the police helicopter was out monitoring for people breaking the violations of the curfew. And they became a very useful resource detecting turtle nests. Here's a picture of a turtle nest. But this is an interesting nest because we started to see things in the environment which we wouldn't normally see. This is a nest in an area where previously there wasn't turtle nesting. But without people there, the turtles started to expand their usual nesting sites. Similarly, the Stingray City, which is a major attraction, not really very natural, but the tourism sector and the water sports industry were very concerned we were going to lose that industry. The rays that had been so conditioned to being hand-fed would just drift off and the whole thing would collapse. So we were drafted in to keep feeding the rays. So that's been a kind of a nice, unique experience to go out there and feed stingrays. But interestingly, we start to see some of our more reclusive characters showing up. So a couple of black-tip sharks, which we always knew were there, but when there's a lot of people around, you don't see them. They started showing up, which is great to see these kind of gentle shifts in the environment as the human pressure is relieved. Some more immediate challenges at a national level now. These are, Andy already mentioned that Cayman has a enhanced marine protected area proposal, which the government committed to in April this year. Unfortunately, in drafting the regulations and the slight delay in getting stuff ready, we've kind of missed that window of opportunity. And we in the department, this hasn't been spoken about yet, but we in the department are very concerned that this will no longer be a priority. People's welfare and the ability to go fishing is going to take precedence over these new marine park proposals. And also in May of 2021, next year, we've got an election, and contentious things like marine park proposals around election times may be something that people are not willing to take on. So fingers crossed this won't happen, but there is a real possibility that the marine park proposals will remain dormant for the next couple of years, or sorry, months and years while things settle down. We also have species turtle conservation plans, which we're trying to get out to help with turtle-friendly lighting. Lighting is a really big issue for our nesting hatchlings. We also got important spear gun regulations, which are supposed to accompany the marine park application. But all of this is potentially on hold because everything at the moment that the government is talking about is COVID-related, everything. We also had an interesting private effort to map our entire EEZ. We know very little about the resources off there. That was scheduled to take place during the last couple of months, but we've heard nothing. And I would imagine with the kind of pending financial crisis that is imminent, the funding for this may well dry up. Again, just something that we don't know. I'm quickly going to talk about the local economy because although it might not seem marine related, it does actually tie into the bigger picture. We are completely dependent, or very dependent, on financial services, tourism and development. I'm hearing that financial services hasn't been too badly impacted, although that may change. Obviously, tourism and development have been on hold for the last couple of months. Tourism contributes about 20% to the economy. In 2019, we had a good year, 3% growth in the economy, but notice led by construction and by hotels and restaurants, which is tourism. Local unemployment rate 3.5, which is not too bad. Recently, the government, the Economics and Statistics Office looked at the finances as a result of COVID. They had two scenarios. The economy opens in July 2020, one with visitors at 20% of last year, and one with no visitors. Either scenario is really very, very bleak. Opening in July is also pretty optimistic, but either way, we're looking at nearly 2,700 to 2,900 Caymanians unemployed, and a massive unemployment rate. These people are largely taxi and tour operators and perhaps people in construction. They're a very difficult kind of sector of people to reskill. So going back to the ocean, going back to the seas to kind of feed and supplement their daily lives is a very possible reality. Interestingly, our Environmental Protection Fund is funded primarily through visitors. That brings in about 5 to 8 million a year. We've had limited success in the time it's been available using that money, but things were starting to change. The government was seeing the way we were buying land for protection. It looks like that fund will lose a significant amount of money this year, so that's a big setback. So why do I bring all this up? Well, the truth is, and that last point there, development in Cayman has always been the kind of the backstop that the government goes to. It quickly gets jobs. It looks good on kind of election campaigns. So we're very worried that the development pressure is going to mean significant problems in terms of the current practices. We're expecting to see the relaxation of the requirements for EIAs, large areas of land cleared just to promote development. So the government can be seen to be doing something quickly. And I think at the moment, that's probably our most significant threat moving forward, and particularly for marine conservation, because everybody wants to be on the coast. And with that, I'll leave it at that. Oh, sorry, one other quick thing. There was, for the department, it was renewed interest. In fact, in Cayman, it was renewed interest, actually, in the fact that people, because they weren't allowed to go in their cars and they had to walk close to home, people started to get out into the environment and they started to appreciate a nice environment. And those that didn't have it, either in developments where things hadn't been done so well, really noticed the problem. So there's been a very big uptake in the idea that the environment is a really important part of life in Cayman, and we'd forgotten about it. We got in our cars to go to work, we sat in traffic, went into the air conditioned office, came home, did it all again. But the break-in the kind of day-to-day monotony and the traffic has really made people take a closer look at how they live their lives. And we're optimistic about that. The Department of Environment, working with the local National Conservation Council, tried to seize that opportunity and has come up with a kind of a roadmap helping government to try to come up. The government's putting together think tanks with ways to get the economy restarted. We tried to feed into that. We're really looking towards people, moving towards a greener economy. We think that this is the way to do it. We've got time to take a breath. The hotels are empty. There's time to rethink how we move forward. And so that's an area that we're also quite optimistic about. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. That's really, really interesting, and really interesting to see those parallels in terms of people appreciating green space and nature outside of their homes. That is certainly an effect that we've noticed here in the UK as well. look, I think there is one question or two on.
Yes, we have one question and one offer of support. So we have John Turner, who tells me that there's one MSc student undertaking death study in Bangor, using 2019 data from the Cayman annual surveys. But if DOE can record Bensick's survey later this summer, then he could contribute to the data analysis.
That's fantastic. I don't know if I should answer these as we go along, but yeah, I'm aware of the 2019 data getting written. That's great. And yeah, I think Croy McCoy, our senior research officer in charge of our monitoring, is definitely, we're looking at ways to get that data and to try to keep that relationship with Bangor going. So John, thanks very much for that.
And then a couple of questions, one from Jean-Luc, who asks how much land is protected and what is the remaining as non-developed?
Oh man, this is a complicated question. The figures are going to escape me, but I'm going to try. So previously, the Cayman government didn't have legislation to protect land. The National Conservation Law was passed in 2013 and has been coming into force in bits and pieces. And that's the first bit that allowed protected land. So some government land is being protected, but the figures escape me. I want to think it's probably about 15% of total Cayman land areas protected. I hope this is right. I will definitely go back and get these figures. But there is a large amount. So previously, before Cayman government could protect land, the National Trust had a law that allowed land. And so the trust was very good at buying up important areas and making them inalienable, i.e. protecting them from development. And they are a significant landholder in that regard too. But I think theirs contributes also to the 14% of the 3 islands. But I'm happy to come back and try and get you the actual statistics because we really have them. Yeah.
Thank you. And one final question from John Turner. He's saying that this is an interesting balance between a quick economic fix by development and the importance of environment. Will this help support MPA development rather than MPAs being seen as a reduced priority?
I think this is, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, this is difficult. Yeah, we in the department firmly believe that, and there's lots of people on the island that believe that. We realize we were trying to promote the benefits of marine protected areas. We're trying to show them that, you know, fishing, the evidence around the world is that these things do benefit the local fishery industry. It's just the speed with which these things happen. So there's going to be some kickback. We've done a lot of the public outreach for marine protected areas. We've got the public buy-in, but the delay has meant that things are kind of, you know, they've lost the momentum. And I think the fishing community here is very difficult to convince them. They agree that the marine parks we put in 1986 were a benefit, but the thought of changing them again has proven that you know, difficult message to sell. We have succeeded in it. We've got government to buy into it, but I just think this idea that we're suddenly going to restrict areas where people can go fishing, they won't immediately understand that those benefits that we talked about will still exist. And so I think it's going to be unlikely that they will see that marine protected areas as a benefit, you know, enhancing marine protected as a benefit to the environment immediately. And they are, and I completely agree, and most of them in the department and lots of people on island do believe that they would. Now is a more important time than ever to put these marine protected areas in place, because the fishing pressure, I went for a drive yesterday, is immense. People are allowed to fish from shore now. There are all the people out of work, the expat force that don't have salaries anymore. The fishing pressure on shore at the moment is immense, and on boats, because they've also amended it. The only reason you can go on a boat is to go fishing, and I failed to mention this, but you can, if you go to a restaurant, you have to sit, you know, with your household, but you are allowed to meet 6 people on a boat and go fishing, but you can't do so in a restaurant. All kind of strange.
Okay, I think we do need to move on. I know there is one further question about Shark program, and maybe we can come back to that at the end if we have time. Thanks, Tessa, for raising that. So the next, and Tim, thank you very much. Very enlightening, actually, and interesting to see that the fines for breaking the curfew were effective where the fines for poaching were not, and maybe that's also something to look at. Okay, our next speaker is from Anguilla Government, Kathy Gums. So over to you.
Hello? Hello?
Hi, Kathy. We can hear you. You're quite faint.
Okay, good. I think I pressed it a few times, so I was unsure. Today is a holiday in Anguilla, so I have the children home with me, and it's going to be it might be a bit challenging for me to make this presentation smoothly, but we'll
Sorry,
get through it.
Kathy, we can't hear you. Are you able to turn your sound up?
No. Hold on. Maybe I need to move to go.
That's better.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
That's better. That's better. Hello.
Hello. Yes, whatever you did a minute ago was.
Okay. Let me relocate because I think where I am, I don't have a good connection because it said my internet is unstable. So if you just give me 2 seconds to move.
Okay.
It's good to see the issues of working from home and COVID are global in terms of neighbors with drum and bass. I don't know if anyone's heard the drum and bass from my next door, and also homeschooling, which is proving to be a headache.
Lockdown in the Caribbean or lockdown in North London?
If you can't go out, what difference does it make?
Maybe it's the view that helps.
Hello. Hi.
Oh, hi.
Oh, I think this is much better. Is it?
Yes.
Okay, I was just apologizing because today is a holiday and I am actually working from home and my children are at home with me because the sitter is closed today. So,
Sorry, Kathy, we still can't hear you. Are you able?
no?
I think as you got closer, we heard you a bit clearer.
Okay, is this better?
No, you seem further away.
Hello?
Oh, perfect.
That's good? Okay.
Yeah.
Better.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was trying to use headphones, but maybe that doesn't work so well.
No, we can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. I was just apologizing for any noise that may come up because the children are home with me because today's a holiday. I believe that we are all facing the same issues as it relates to COVID-19 and marine protection and fishing industry, environmental protection, all these things. So I think we will all be speaking the same language today. Can everybody hear me? I just want to make sure before I can. Yeah?
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly. Yeah.
Okay, so Anguilla thus far, we have been rather lucky because we had 3 cases of COVID-19 and they've all recovered. So far, no more reports of anyone with COVID-19 and nobody have been tested within the last month or so, or over a month. The island went on lockdown in March, sometime in March, I think like around March 20, between 25th and 28th, I can't remember the exact dates. But we went on lockdown, our ports were closed and only cargo vessels were allowed to leave and enter the island. And when the island went on lockdown, the government put out a list of essential workers, and on that list, the fishermen were not included, fisheries. So we had some issues where lots of fishermen were arguing as to their need to go fishing and for them to be included as those essential workers. So we had a series of meetings. We were working from home, our department, our offices were closed, and we worked from home and we tried to sort that out. Just a bit about our fishing industry. So we have 127 licensed fishers. And we have a very large exclusive fishing zone. It expands 85,500 square kilometers with 200 miles to the north. Fishing is mainly artisanal, and fishers only use to about 40 miles of that EFZ. We have maybe 2 or 3 fishermen going to the extent of the EFZ on a regular. And fishing contributes 1.5% to the island's gross domestic product. Our main fisheries are lobster, reef fish, pelagic, and conch to a lesser extent. So before COVID-19 was on the scene, we had challenges like everybody else, like all the overseas territories. We all have challenges, and some of those challenges that the department faced were powers of arrest. We don't have, hang on, baby. We don't have the power to make any arrests, so we have to do that in conjunction with the police. We don't have a boat for enforcement, and fisheries is not seen as a priority area for government, and that's been the case for a very long time, even though all political leaders speak a lot about fisheries and fisheries development. We don't really see that level of investment into that area. There's little or no funding available for people who want to enter this sector. And the cost of fuel is very high. Well, in the past, we didn't have much cooperation from the fishermen, with very few of them coming in to license their vessels. There's little opportunities to education and training as it relates to fisheries. And our department has a very small complement of 6. There's need for thorough stock assessment, and there's limited data due to a lack of cooperation from the fishers. There's a lot of distrust from government, and we are working with outdated and ineffective legislation, which we've been pushing to have amended since 2015. And then there's the untimely landing of catch, which makes it very difficult for us to collect data, with fishermen coming in, going out very early in the morning before some of the fisheries officers can make it out, and coming in late, coming in at sporadic hours. So we have fishermen going and leaving throughout the entire day. So we can't, with our small staff complement, it's very difficult for us to collect that data. And our nearshore stocks are believed to be depleted from conversations with fishers from we run what is called the Angular Marine Monitoring Program, which we've been doing since 2007. And so we've been noting a depletion in nearshore stocks. So some of the challenges before COVID directly related to the fishers. There aren't much storage space on vessels. The vessels that they use are mainly small open hull vessels, wooden boats. They use ineffective gasoline engines, and gas is extremely expensive. They have intimate relationships with the markets. This is good and bad, because they have that friendly relationship with the market. Sometimes the fishermen, they go directly to the markets and drop off their fish. So they are the middleman, the fisher, the supplier, and the bill collector. They do everything. There is a lack of companies. There's lots of individuals. Actually, there's no fishing company on the island. So there's a lot of individualistic fishing, and there's no one co-op that collects fish and work on behalf of the fishers. There was actually a co-op, but it is weak. It's very weak. The structure is weak. There's no processing plants for storage and marketing. I think I already spoke to the high cost of fuel. Fishing goods, just to buy supplies to go fishing, it is also very expensive. Fishers have to pay a surcharge, even though fishing goods are duty free, they still pay some sort of custom surcharge on the goods. And fishermen, the fishing industry is way too dependent on the hospitality industry. So when the hospitality industry is down, like the challenge we are facing now, the fishing industry faces many, many challenges. So with COVID-19 on the scene now, some of the challenges that we face, initially, fishing was not listed as an essential service, as I stated before. So we had a series of meetings with the Royal Anguilla Police Force, Customs and Immigration, those people who deal with border control, because they were viewing fishing as a threat to border security because of our proximity to St. Martin. At the time, St. Martin had very, very high cases of COVID-19, and the belief was that they weren't getting things under control on the island. And our relationship with St. Martin has been that boats go between the islands frequently, between the two islands, boats always between there. And so they were afraid that we would have people that could be possibly COVID-19 positive coming over to Anguilla, or vice versa, people from Anguilla going over to St. Martin. And then we may have been faced with a worse situation. Rather than just 3 cases, we would have seen a lot more. It would have been worse, and the island may not have been able to handle it, the resources at the hospital. So that was one of the biggest reasons why the authorities tasked with securing our borders were hesitant to allow fishing, but with much deliberation, we worked with the government and border control and the fishermen, and we were able to allow them to go fishing. Of course, with some very, very strict guidelines. So they were only allowed to fish 3 days, on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So the problem that we were faced with was that all fishermen were going out on the same 3 days. And the slide before, if you remember, I said the fisherman, he's the fisher, the sales agent, and the bill collector. They clean their own fish. So the challenges that you had were that you had 3 days to fish, and within those 3 days, you also had to clean your fish and sell your fish. So fishermen were complaining that it was not enough time because of all these things that they had to do. And the other problem was that the market was saturated on the same days. So we're faced with illegal fishing. Almost every day, border patrol were interdicting vessels from St. Martin who were fishing in our waters illegally. They didn't have a license to fish, and our borders were closed, so they were breaching more than one of the island regulations. There was still a bit of resistance, a lack of cooperation in obtaining fishing licenses. And then with the closure of the large restaurants, especially those that are on the hotel, the larger hotel properties, the closure of those restaurants negatively impacted the fishers because they were the main markets. And a lot of the fishermen take fish to St. Martin, especially lobster, which is the most lucrative fishery. They take it over to St. Martin, and they were no longer able to take the fish themselves to St. Martin. The ability to catch fish was greater than the local demand because you had more than one problem. We have an expansion of water, so the fishermen And we have very skilled fishers. So they are able to catch a lot of fish. Our population is small, and within the small population, a lot of people want to work in to support the fishers to be able to purchase fish from the fishers. So that was two big challenges there. Some fishermen also reported changing the type of fishing that they did because there weren't much sale for lobsters, and they weren't able to get the price. They weren't able to fetch the price that they would normally sell the lobsters for. They shifted from catching lobsters and selling lobsters to fishing on fads or line fishing, spear fishing. So that was a challenge and at the same time an opportunity. Opportunity because then they branch out to learning new types of fishing. They gave one species a break. Another challenge was one of the financial challenges that the fishermen were faced with was that, you know, they were making less money, and then there was little or no financial assistance. So the government was offering, is still offering 800 EC dollars to people who are unemployed or underemployed. But I mean, 800 EC, it is a bit of assistance, but according to your household, it would be hard to get by on just that. And so reduction in sales, reduction in money, and makes it harder for fishers to sustain their families. So some COVID-19 opportunities, it was not all bad. There were some blessings in the mix of this COVID-19 pandemic. Like the presenter before me from Cayman Islands spoke about people who were able to look at the environment and appreciate it. You had turtles nesting in areas where tourists would have populated those places before, and now you have turtles going. So I think we all saw some blessings in the mix of this pandemic. Currently, I think since 2 weeks ago, fishermen were allowed to fish every day. There's no project funding available. We recently wrote a concept note relating to sustainable fisheries in that area and building resilience. And the community college, the Anguilla Community College, they saw the need to help people to be able to feed themselves and fend for themselves. And so they are planning to put on a survival series. So this is now educational opportunities for fishers, which is very good. In the past, we had difficulties coordinating joint patrols with the Royal Anguilla Police Force and Customs. And now, because of the need for border security, protecting our borders, we have those patrols. We have those ongoing patrols with the Anguilla Police Force and Customs, and they are doing a marvelous job with keeping our borders safe and stopping illegal fishing. And we had so much trouble with getting that assistance to stop illegal fishing in the past. The cost of fuel have dropped, so it becomes a bit more affordable for fishers. And I mentioned the change in the type of fishing. There are now new advocacy groups where the Fisher Folk Association have been weakened. A few fishers got together when they were lobbying for government to allow them to go fishing. They formed a special fisheries committee. I can't remember the exact name, but it's along those lines. And I think this showed them that it is good for them to come together and advocate for something, and there needs to be a well-established body and what they can do in numbers. So it was an eye-opening opportunity for them. You have fishers who would have given up fishing because it's not as lucrative as it used to be, given it up temporarily and found new vocations in construction. A lot of them are now in the construction field and agriculture as well. There's been a reduction in the cost of some fish. The lobsters I used to sell for $8, $9 a pound, they've been selling them for $5 a pound, US dollars. And the pelagic, the mahi, and the tuna are now $6 a pound from $8 a pound. To assist the border patrol authorities with security, the government procured tracking devices. So we were never able to track the fishers. So this is good in terms of collecting data for the department and safety and security. If something has to happen to the fishermen, we would have an idea as to where they are. And this is something that we're actually going to try and make mandatory when we have gone past the COVID phase.
Thank you, Kathy. We're just running over slightly on time. Are you able to sum up briefly?
If you go to the next slide. Okay, I'll just finish in like a minute.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
So COVID-19 has affected marine management efforts. We have we're faced with smuggling, illegal fishing, and theft on the sea. How have marine management authorities adapted to the new situation? We've tried to source markets and forge partnerships with people in St. Martin because they have a larger population. So hopefully they'll be able to absorb some of the captured fish. And we're working on that relationship with the Royal Anguilla Police Force and Customs. Next slide, please. So this is just real quick from our management needs. There is a need for staffing, financial support within the department and for fishers, and more cottage industries. Go to the next slide, please. And that's it from me. I don't know if you have any questions.
Yes, thank you very much. Ida, are there any questions?
There is one question here, which is from Peter Richardson. The DFMR have had boats and vehicles in the past, i.e. in early 2000. What needs to happen to ensure DFMR is properly resourced with boats, vehicles again? How can the UK government help through Blue Belt?
I guess providing funding for the vehicle. We have one unreliable vehicle, which makes it difficult for data collection at about 6 different ports. But the government, the Anguilla government, isn't in a financial situation where they can purchase those vehicles. I saw the UK government sent a few vehicles following the passage of Hurricane Irma. However, the Department of Fisheries weren't lucky like the other departments to get one of those vehicles. So, Mr. Richardson, you may have to help me with how we can actually get a vehicle from the UK government.
Kathy, just as chair, maybe I can ask one supplementary question. I mean, obviously, you were able to do joint patrols.
Yes.
Is that something that you'd be able to carry on doing going forwards?
We, in the past, like maybe around 2010, 2011, we used to do a lot of joint patrols with the police and customs because the police had 2 nice vessels. And so we used to do a lot of that, and they had a Marine base. They no longer have a Marine base, and they don't have any vessels. I don't know if after the COVID-19 situation is settled down, if the police and customs would be still interested in illegal fishing and marine protection. I will ask, and it's something that I will continue to push and encourage them to help us do, but I think it will be very expensive for them because currently the government, they're actually renting civilian vessels for border security. And those civilians may not be comfortable with police doing interdictions in their on their vessels, because then when they go to use it for their own personal reasons, we know how things go and people, and it might be a bit somebody might get vindictive.
Okay.
So I don't know. I think the first thing is that the vessel, we need vessels to continue doing joint patrols. That might be one of the difficulties there.
Okay.
In boats.
So it does sound like there's a genuine need for vessels down there. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think we do need to move on to our next speaker from British Virgin Islands, Abby Christopher, if you're on the line.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, lovely.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen here. If I can get that up for you guys. Okay. Okay, so good morning all. I am Abby Christopher from the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries in the beautiful Virgin Islands. I'm part of the government of the Virgin Islands, and today I will be presenting to you our management challenges during the new normal, as we've been calling it. Oh, okay. So for those of you that might have seen me give a presentation during the Blue Belt Overseas Symposium, which Amdeep spoke to earlier, I will say that some of my slides take from that because of the fact that we very much have the same context of problems. However, due to COVID-19, we do have heightened factors that have stressed the responses, and hopefully I'll be able to shed some clarity to that for you. So for those that have never heard of the beautiful Virgin Islands, despite the slide saying British, that's an American thing. The beautiful Virgin Islands is in the Caribbean. We are at the longitude latitude, as you see there, and we currently have an exclusive fisheries zone. We are in the process for designating or looking towards moving that towards an exclusive economic zone. However, it is currently a exclusive fisheries zone. And we do have a protected area system with a land coverage of 153.67 kilometers square and about 82,759 kilometers square of waters already protected. This does not mean that we intend to stop there, but just to give you a closer view of it. So if you zoom in on what would have been that little red ping that you saw, this is where our land coverage is towards the south, and what is labeled Virgin Islands there is actually the US Virgin Islands. So as you can see, there's very little space between us, which in the light of COVID-19 can become problematic as our borders are currently closed to non-locals and non-residents. One of the most recent additions in the ever-evolving situations is that as of the 11th of this month, there was what was termed the exclusion zone declared, and this would be the space where approved vessel coverage movement can happen. Previously, vessels were not allowed to move on the waters. However, fishers were deemed as a priority. And so they were allowed to go out during the hours of curfew, which would have been varied from anywhere from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. Currently, they're at 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. However, fishing is only allowed currently from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m., which is problematic for those fishers that typically fish in the evening, as well as for those fishers that would primarily go a further distance, because it does mean that they wouldn't be able to access those fishing grounds. However, with this new exclusion zone, it does not include many of those fishing areas that the majority of them went to. So it does actually mean that our currently licensed fishers have been, for the most part, landlocked. So I mentioned that we had protected areas. We have a protected area system plan, which was for 2007, 2017, which sought to declare 33% of all of our existing habitat types. And this is currently under revision. I believe, I'm not sure if the update has been officially passed, but it should be passed this year. And it sought to protect our marine spaces in various facets, everything from strict protection, which is where we'll have things like, for example, Hans Creek, which is one of our fisheries protected areas, which is designated for the juvenile protections, and it's been found to have several key species, not just for the Virgin Islands, but also contributing towards the fisheries of many other regional territories. So it's critical towards the fisheries of the region, and so it's one of those areas that we would have strict protection on. And then you would have other managed spaces where you might have tourists be able to go, but then you'd have requirements. Perhaps they were not allowed to use certain sunscreens, perhaps you can only access with the benefit of a local guide, things of that nature. So what are these challenges that we're currently facing? So during the Blue Belt, I mentioned these, and I will go through and highlight how, particularly during COVID-19, we've seen these challenges sort of increase. There's the geography factor. Unfortunately, we do not have the blessing of our colleagues in Anguilla of having a single island with several ports to address. Many of our ports are on the sister islands. However, the seat of our department is currently only on Tortola. And with the restrictions of travel between the islands and our department not currently having vessels to be able to go between it on our own and having to actually depend on public transportation, we're unable to actually have a physical presence for monitoring or any other management needs that we might have. Monitoring IUU fishing, which we have seen similar to our colleagues, I believe it was TCI earlier that mentioned, a massive increase, particularly from persons that now find themselves unemployed. We have a highly migratory population, so many persons were not within the country at the time, and now with them returning, you have that question of, are they going to be returning with anything, particularly as the country was declared COVID-19 free. And we typically have a high visitor rate and the impact of those visitors as well, both beneficial as well as not, because tourism is one of those things that contributes massively towards the economy of the country, as well as for provision of jobs, as well as we do have a very vibrant sport and recreational fishing market, as well as, of course, our commercial fishers, which are local and provide the actual extracted fish for food security. And paper parks. We do have intentions for declaring many spaces, and they've been identified. However, we've not had the opportunity of actually being able to execute some of those declarations yet. And with COVID-19 shifting the priority of things that have been going to be declared, and seated at House of Assembly, brought before Cabinet, we've seen a time shift, as well as somewhat a priority shift in some places as to what is being brought before. So what are the priority needs? Now, for enforcement, because of the fact that we are very limited in our ability to be able to get to the different spaces, many of us are working from home. We do need to be able to get creative in the ways that we're able to spot vessels, particularly those that are not in the near shore or in that limited space that was defined. We do have partner enforcement, what we call authorized officers, persons of customs, immigrations, and other government departments that we find to be essential, like the police department, have the powers to be able to enforce fisheries laws. Unfortunately, they're not as familiar with what those infractions might be or what you might wish to look for. On the positive side of it, our licensed fishers pre-COVID-19, seeing the effect of it on the fisheries, have really stepped up in their support of enforcement opportunities. So when they are actually allowed out, they make a point of taking pictures of anything that they might see that's a violation and notifying us of persons that are not licensed, the illegal fishers, that might be doing things in contravention to the law so that we might be able to address them. We need to be able to improve our management regimes, particularly for sport and pleasure fishing. We started working on these and they should have been promoted during this space so that when the tourist season begins, more so September, we would really be able to launch into that. With COVID delaying those plans, we do worry as to how we're going to be able to implement both what we intended to do as well as all of the adjustments we might have to make, as almost all of the participants from the sport and pleasure fishing that we get applying for licenses come from nations that are currently heavily impacted by COVID-19. Increased resource access for implementation of the legislation. So while we are updating our existing legislation right now to incorporate agriculture, the other facets of food sustainability, as the fisheries has been moved under the agriculture, or rather there's been a merger of what was formerly the agriculture department and the fisheries section of conservation and fisheries into one department for food security. We have been holding consultation with the licensed fishers and really looking at how we need to update the laws in order to best provide food security for the country. COVID-19 showed us that if there were to be anything, as well as Irma and Maria with the hurricanes, if there was anything that stopped our imports, or if we could not bring food into the country, with the majority of our food not currently being produced in country, we need to have stricter management as well as better business practices. It also means that whatever legislations are put in force, we need to be able to enforce them. Everything from vessels to having staff to better communication tools, so that during COVID-19, for example, there were lots of spaces we couldn't access, and there were some persons that didn't necessarily have access to accounts or basic computer technology finesse that you would wish to be able to dial into the virtual meetings and really be able to get the support and the feedback and the knowledge that we might have been circulating. While there were lots of information going around on the WhatsApp and these other social media type spaces, older fishers, of course, would not have had the benefit of this. So that is something that we are looking at how we're going to be able to address that. Science-based management remains a priority, having those baselines and boundaries and really looking at ways to address our stressors. We did have several research opportunities that we wish to line up this year, but with COVID-19 making it so that we cannot bring researchers to the country because they would not be a local or a national or resident, how we're going to be able to fill those gaps is something that is still very much up in the air. We are, with the fines and the fees, as was mentioned in the second bullet point, those we are hoping to address with the update of the legislation, which is ongoing. And the geo-reference data systems is something that's also supposed to be built into that. However, while we're seeing shifts in the priorities of the water spaces, even though it is an exclusive fisheries zone and we are moving towards an economic exclusive exclusive economic zone, apologies, the priorities of the water space. Is it something that's most or best suited for a security need if that comes up? How does fisheries weigh into that? How does your marine for environmental management spaces weigh into that? These are things that we've never really, prior to this situation, really had to weigh back and forth because we had a shared need for it. With it changing a little bit, it is something that we are forced to think about.
Okay,
and
Abby.
I think this is the last one.
Okay, thank you.
The education factor of it. With all the new persons that find themselves unemployed, everyone wishes to be a fisher now. And particularly since the government did announce a $2 million stimulus, which really will not go that far for farmers and fishers to assist during this time, every person wishes to be a fisher or a farmer. And so having these very new persons that do not know the system, have not gone through the trainings or have the experience that our past fishers and farmers would have had, and really being able to know what you can do to the marine space, how it affects it from an ecological standpoint and all of those factors, it is a challenge. And so we are looking at how we might be able to design a training program to help that, but also how would you be able to execute that with social distancing and limited travel between the various islands. Certifications for all these processes, as well as how we can introduce research opportunities locally if we cannot have the benefit of the external inputs physically coming as much as possible. You know, getting our partner agencies, NGOs, really getting involved in it to be able to achieve those baselines we were talking about. And so with that, not very over my time, according to my watch, is my presentation, and I welcome and open the floor to any questions that might be there. I will give back the share screen.
Thank you, Abby. That was really interesting, and interesting to see the parallels of actually increasing fishing pressure, which is a common factor in all of the talks so far. Are there any questions?
No new questions have come through.
Okay.
No questions for this talk, just a couple of outstanding from earlier talks.
Kind of not wanting to encourage any questions until probably the end now, so we can rattle on and get through to the last three speakers. And please do bear in mind it's time's running on, so we are going to be running a little bit late. We might wrap up perhaps just before 4 o'clock. But in any case, thank you, Abby. And our next speaker is Dr. Shannon Gore.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, lovely, thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Amdeep and Christy, for putting this all together. My name is Shannon Gore. I am the managing director of a small local nonprofit called the Association of Reef Keepers. We were set up in the early 1990s, but it wasn't until 2014 when I took it over. I created 5 very specific programs with one purpose. We're dedicated to the preservation and sustainability of our marine resources here in the BVI. One of the programs is coral restoration. However, that has evolved into coral restoration and rescue. Rescue meaning that we're trying to deal with stony coral tissue loss disease. I'm going to backtrack a little bit so that you can kind of understand what's been going on and see how it's been evolving. Back in January of 2019, the USVI had their first confirmed outbreak. Subsequently, the various organizations in the USVI and the USVI government, they were getting together and they were having weekly phone calls and talking about the spatial spread, research, intervention, communications, kind of how to move forward and deal with the situation. I was listening into these conversations and just kind of playing follow the leader, so to speak. Later in the year, I received 2 grants. The first one, I focused mostly on chartering boats to actively look for the disease, specifically on the western side of the territory because it was already in the USVI. I also started creating educational materials targeted towards our 6 dive operators and about 100 crewed yachts. Because they are on the front lines, they are our eyes on the water. Then in 2020, I was still going out and looking for the disease, not seeing anything. But I started working more closely with some of the bigger resorts, looking at activities of how to raise more money, trying to get people involved with citizen science. I was looking at updating an older version of the Marine Awareness Guide that I created back in 2010. And I finally got one of my coral nurseries back up and running. From the grants, I also created something called a disease detective kit. It was basically for the dive operators to sell in their dive shops to both raise awareness, but also to raise money specifically for this disease. I also had a couple of the scientists from the USVI come over and talk about SCTLD and the impacts it was having over there. And a week later, basically the world fell apart, and you can see kind of our timeline. You know, our borders closed and we were under 24-hour lockdown, excuse me, basically the last week of March and throughout April. Next slide. One of the key challenges has been not being able to go out in the field. However, it is a perfect opportunity to get people's attention. You know, people were not working, nobody was on charter. So I created a webinar, and it was basically, I was able to get a lot of people to listen. And it was just a great opportunity to reach out to people and teach them kind of what was going on. They didn't really have anything better to do anyways. I was still on the weekly phone calls with the USVI, and by early May, the USVI had confirmed SCTLD on the north side of St. John. I kind of knew it was a critical point to get out and see what was really going on. And I received permission from the Ministry of Health. I was able to do 5 dives on May 11th, and I found only 2 corals that looked really suspicious. I sent those to Florida, and it was recommended that I go out again, remove those corals, and really look around, because by then, if it was SCTLD, then it would start emerging. I went back out on the 17th, I removed those corals, but I also found a couple other corals that were infected, and that's when we officially confirmed the disease in the BVI. This then triggered an intense effort in the USVI to look at the eastern side of St. John, and unfortunately, it was extensively found at Flanagan Island in Leduc, which is, I don't know if you can see the, I don't know if you can see it. It's basically the islands that are the closest to the BVI and the dive site that I had actually found the disease. Then on May 30th, I took out some of the strike team that I had already given the webinar for, and the first dive we saw a couple of corals, but it was the second dive that it was absolutely striking what was happening. And even though I had been in Florida and I had seen the disease, and you know, sitting in and listening to all of these conversations that we were having, actually seeing it here was just heartbreaking. And I knew we needed a really serious push to get the word out. And last week, the minister actually raised the issue in cabinet, which was really, really good. You know, the second challenge is funding. You know, like so many other businesses, how are we going to raise money with no tourists? But because I was building a lot of stronger relationships with the dive ops and with a lot of the crude yachts, you know, with more people, there's more ideas that were evolving. One of the ideas was to take the disease detective kit, instead of just selling it, but create a local dive specialty course. You know, instead of going through PADI and NAUI, and getting a card, you actually get it's a little BCD medallion. But what was really interesting is they started reaching out to their contacts because they had seen it and they saw how serious this was. I started getting emails from bigger donors, basically. It was people that I was talking with that I normally wouldn't talk to. So it was really forging these new partnerships. And when you look at all these different entities in Florida and the USVI, it's not one particular organization or entity that's leading it. There's no top-down command and control type governance. It is everybody is pooling their resources, and you know, both technical and financial, trying to deal with this. In the USVI, they actually hired somebody through the National Science Foundation grant under, I guess, the University of Virgin Islands, just to coordinate all of these people. So it's not one person that's doing this. It's trying to get everybody involved. I refer to having gone through Hurricanes Irma and Maria, particularly the aftermath. You know, it was a humanitarian crisis, you know, with no communications. It's not like any one entity could take the lead. Everyone just started helping each other. With SCTLD, it is a reef crisis, and we're literally in this kind of triage situation. Whatever resources we can pool to start trading and looking at the spatial spread is key. But not everyone can, basically until everyone can sit down and work together, we're losing time. You know, if people are arguing who's leading who, you know, we're never going to get anywhere. And I think once we all sit down together, we're going to reemerge with getting better data, engaging more people, and engaging more donors. You know, things like research, right now that's not a priority. There's so many other people that are doing it. So I think kind of at the end of the day, long term, we'll be able to do more of that type of work. Recognizing some of the smaller organizations, you know, even though they're really small, we can pool our resources together to be more effective. And especially when reporting to donors, you know, they want to see a return on their investment, and we're required to be transparent. And at the end of the day, I think everyone is being impacted by COVID-19 in one way or another, and people are very, very sensitive. And I think it's you know, you don't have to like who you're working with, just be professional and be respectful of kind of what the other person is going through. You know, this isn't, SCTLD is not a humanitarian crisis, but it is a reef crisis, and it will take an army of people. And there's so many people that rely on these reefs. They're really going to be the ones that work really hard to try to do something about it. So closing the door on them is one of the worst things to do. You know, this is kind of a new reality. How do we work around this? And, you know, there's less money, there's less resources. We cannot work the same way we used to, and we have to start thinking outside the box. And that is it.
Excellent.
I do 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's perfectly. That's absolutely spot on. I haven't seen any questions come in. If there are any, if we can just hold them to the end of the presentation now. Thank you very much, Shannon. That was really good. And you know, interesting really to look at the comparison, and also what's possible by bringing in people, you know, building those relationships and reaching out to new resources really to assist seems to be one way forward. Okay, well, let's swiftly move on to our next speaker from the Turks and Caicos, if we may, Kathy Lockhart, if you please.
Yes, hopefully everybody can hear me. I'm going to try to share my screen as well.
That's great. We can definitely hear you. That's excellent.
Trying to, not quite sure how to share the screen though.
If you go to the bottom, there should be a little arrow.
Yes, I see that. Oh, there it is. Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, are you able to see this?
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, my name is Kathy Lockhart. I am the Assistant Director for Fisheries, Protected Areas, and Revenue for the Department of Environment and Coastal Resources in the Turks and Caicos Islands. And our particular department is the one that's primarily responsible for any of the marine activities such as protected areas, fishing, even terrestrial-based environment, anything like that. So just to give you a little of what is going on in the Turks and Caicos. Okay, so at the end of March in 2020, the Turks and Caicos, like many other countries, went into a complete lockdown. And what ended up happening with that was we didn't have it set up where any particular organization was separating out who was considered essential or not. So the government created legislation that determined who the essential workers were, which of course, medical, police, immigration, customs, that sort of thing. Unfortunately, our department was not considered essential, and neither were the fishermen considered any type of essential for food sustainability or anything like that. So what ended up happening was, as time had kind of gone on, we started to notice that people were still kind of sneaking out and doing illegal activities. So the government ended up determining a few of our conservation officers would be considered essential. But with that, they were also to help with any type of curfew lockdowns, anything like that. And on top of that, our fishermen, if they wanted to be able to conduct work out on their boat by themselves, they had to write into the government and seek permission. And that permission had to have along with it that you were a commercial fisherman, a licensed commercial fisherman, and that you had your own licensed vessel to go out in. So it wasn't that anybody could just go offshore and go fishing or anything like that. So our entire economy was shut down completely. So I kind of wanted to go a little bit about what Amdeep had discussed about the Blue Belt program. And the Turks and Caicos, obviously an overseas territory, is very interested in improving the scientific understanding, developing and implementing the evidence-based marine management strategies, improving approaches to surveillance and enforcement, and improving the management of the sustainable long-term. So all of those different tasks within the Blue Belt is definitely something the Turks and Caicos is still continuing to strive for. And I don't know if you noticed the map that's off to the right just a small bit. That is how our Turks and Caicos is set up. We're a string of about 7 main islands that have persons that live on it, and probably over 40 plus keys. When we went into lockdown at the end of March, basically it was a lockdown even between islands. So we are still on lockdown and cannot travel between the islands until the 22nd of this month. And then we are advised that as of the 22nd of July, we are looking to open our borders for international regional travel. There will be some additional, protocol that's put in place and that sort of thing. So we're in a phased reopening right now. As far as like the Blue Belt program activities, these are activities that, we have been involved in right up to the COVID-19 issues. And that included like the legislation and policy strategy, where our maritime department, worked along with, I think it was a Darwin Press project, I'm not sure, it's a different department, but they worked on drafting their maritime legislation for a ship registered, as well as conducting maritime surveys for shipping channels and information and trying to draft that out. We've also had the assessment with management of resources and human activities. Last year, before the COVID came down, we did have a group that came in and we were starting to tackle the invasive non-native species in the Turks and Caicos. And what we determined through that was most of our invasives were mostly land-based that were of highest concern, even though we do know that lionfish is invasive here. We also had marine environment and biodiversity. This is dealing with like natural capital, and we did have another project with that to determine our natural capital and start to catalog that. And we've recently been approved for another Darwin project to kind of extend on top of that and be able to map out how our natural capital is being used and is it being effective. We also, with the data systems and management, we've always looked to improve our data management and collection. We have a marine spatial planning project that's happening right now. And with that, we're looking at having all of our mapped information with fishing activities, protected areas, any type of activities that are going on, and being able to use that with our natural capital as well. With capacity building and local engagement, we do have officers that are in training. With all of the funding that we have been receiving from the Darwin projects, for instance, now is the question that's coming up based on this COVID, how do we address some of these issues as far as travel goes, as far as these capacity buildings. And so we're actually having to go back through quite a few of these proposals and give how we're going to address those types of activities. And very often, since everybody's kind of come up with the online internet, we're trying to set up where, if worst case scenario and you can't travel at a certain time, could we do something like online, like webinar for training activities? With legacy arrangements, we are also looking at sustainable financing. As I've become the assistant director for revenue, we're looking at revamping some of our legislation as well. We have technology innovation where we've just gotten a drone in. So, you know, we're going to try to use that for being able to see some of our activities. Unfortunately, satellite surveillance hasn't really had much happen there, and compliance and enforcement procedures in process. Since we've gotten into the COVID-19, our licensing system for fishing is coming up due at the end of July. And what we have been looking to do and are in the middle of is turning everything to an online form. So if a fisherman, whether it's a recreational or a local commercial fisherman, in order to get those licenses, they have to submit everything electronically. We can go through, evaluate it. So we have everything that will be scanned online, available to each of our islands then to be able to check, you know, legitimacy if they've actually renewed in order to get some more compliance when it comes to the processing of fishing licenses. So our current threats that we've had based on the COVID-19, obviously, like Ms. Gore was talking about with the stony coral tissue loss disease, that is something that is prevalent in the Turks and Caicos. We had started just before COVID-19 where we had worked with a Dr. Abby out of Hawaii who had helped develop some of the different types of monitoring and protocols for dealing with that. And we started to do a chlorinated treatment. We do have a nonprofit organization that has been working with the amoxicillin antibiotic. And unfortunately, when the COVID-19 happened, there was a lockdown. We haven't been able to get back out there. So we're probably gonna have to start that project over again. But the amoxicillin, we have lifted with some of our restrictions, the ability for people to go out into the boats for checking those types of things. And so we have had the TC Reef that has been able to check a couple of those sites with the stony coral tissue disease. We have, unlike others where everybody's saying they've had this increase in catch, we actually have had a reduced catch, at least for our commercial fisheries. What has happened, obviously when we had the lockdown, fishermen weren't able to go out. And we did have some people though, recreationally, that would be going off of the beaches, trying to catch a few fish to take home. We did have some illegal captures when they didn't have licensing, that sort of thing. So we have had a lack of catch. Now, one of our biggest concerns based on this is the fact that we do export quite a bit of our stock of lobster and conch. Fortunately, our lobster season had ended before the COVID-19, but that doesn't stop from when our next season starts. If there is a lack of interest for the importation of it, because the economy is obviously decreasing everywhere. So is there a market for us to be able to have lobster? With conch and lobster for the local fishery, without a tourism industry, we don't have a product to sell there. So this is something that's a threat for us economy-wise. Sargassum will be building up again, usually in June. It's something that we're concerned about. There are definitely illegal foreign poaching that's occurring. Just this last weekend, we were able to catch another boat that had come in with product, and we have been fortunate where the UK has sent in additional military, both medical and maritime, which has helped us dealing not with only the foreign illegal poaching, but just the foreign influx of persons that are coming from Haiti. And our biggest concern is, since we've been on lockdown, is that we can have people that will come in, sneak into the country, and then of course spread that disease or bring in the disease for people. We have been fortunate where we've only had 12 persons that have had or been tested for it that have shown positive. All but we only had one actual person die from. Are you still able to hear me?
Yes, thank you, Kathy.
Okay.
Sorry, carry
Okay.
on. We have
No
just
problem.
one more, if you can just wrap up though, please.
Yep, last two slides. So our challenges, obviously staff quarantine, making people available. Again, we're starting to open that back up, so that should be a good thing, that we'll have some people available to deal with any of the fisheries issues. Other challenges is people asking for individual activities to be able to occur, the lack of the local markets, much less exports, the travel restrictions from the travel between islands, not just going to other countries, but just within the islands itself, and then the IUU foreign poaching and immigration activities. So finally, what we kind of would like to see for our next 6 to 12 months is to reduce the illegal fishing activities. We are revamping our fisheries protection ordinance as well as our national parks ordinance, which are both in cabinet as we speak to be discussed to deal with some of those legal issues there. We also want to increase our basic monitoring, which we're hoping we can get back out, once this system is lifted. Evaluation of our commercial species such as the queen conch. We've now received funding for that from the department ourselves. We've also been looking at other sources to be able to check more thoroughly for one of our main key species. Continue monitoring our stony coral tissue loss disease. But what we're also looking at is the development and revisions of our protected area management plans, which would include the deployment, the infrastructures, maintenance, all of that. So we aren't stopping those things. We're actually, because we're kind of on a lockdown, we're trying to look into those and address those issues now if we can. And then finally, developing the emergency management measures for the management of the protected areas. So we're developing, or what would be nice to have developed is if we ever had another issue or a second phase of the COVID-19 come through, rather than restricting everyone as essential, including the fishermen, have like key departments set up that can say, okay, if we're looking at fishermen going out, how can we have it set up so that they can continue to go out even during a lockdown, but have it in a safe procedure so not everyone would go out on the same time. And that's basically the kind of priorities that we're looking at over the next year.
That's really great, Kathy, and apologies for the slight technical mishap there. Really interesting to see the counterplay between the UK government's Blue Belt and also the Darwin Fund, and how those two are working hand in hand in some places to bring resources to bear. And obviously there seems to be, as ever, a lack of resources in some of these agencies and institutes, and just getting the number of vessels increased would be a really big help, a good step forward. Okay, our last speaker, with no further ado, is from Montserrat, and I can see you've loaded your slides up, so thank you, Kathy, and I pass over to Orwin. Orwin, if you can unmute yourself. Lovely bird song in the background there. Not our speaker. Sorry, I'm just checking to see if
can you hear me?
Oh, and that's better. I'll mute myself and hopefully the nasty echo will disappear.
Okay. Just need to shut one device down.
Yep, that would do.
I hear you much better.
Yeah, that's much better. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, and thanks for inviting us to be part of this presentation. I'm Alvin Pontin, Chief Fisheries and Ocean Governance Officer, and who is responsible for providing technical advice to the government of Montserrat as relates to ocean-related issues. And as we move forward, in the interest of time, the presentation is Ocean Governance Post-COVID 2020 and Beyond, Challenge and Opportunities for the Government of Montserrat. Next slide. Okay, so I think that we all know exactly that COVID started sometime whenever, and our international agencies have actually seen what has actually happened, And Montserrat is no just as a small fry in the bucket. And we have had so many restrictions moving forward. Next slide. From the global picture, we'll actually recognize that all of us globally have been significantly impacted by COVID, and it's a challenge to turn into actual opportunities. Next slide. From the national picture, so what some of the impacts that has actually happened, and I've heard my colleagues from our other overseas territories speak, and I don't want to repeat what they have said, but a few things that we had a curfew, and as it relates to the fisheries and ocean sector, one of the things from when it started, when we found our first case around the middle of March, because we had our St. Patrick activity, and you know, St. Patrick's for Montserrat is national holiday, and this was our festivity. And we realized that there was going to be an impact of COVID-19, and the government of Montserrat took stringent action to ensure that persons who came on island for the festivity got out extremely safely. But one of the things that, as relates to the fishers were seen as an essential service for food and nutrition. And as such, with the curfew, fishers were still allowed to go to sea from 2 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. During the crisis that still, I would say, continue, there was been loss of income and livelihood disrupted in the tourism sector, because that was a point in time where we the little small cruise ships used to come in and stuff, and everything was basically halted. So persons who are, even for the hospitality sector, who are expecting and making preparation to accommodate not only the St. Patrick's persons who are coming in from North America and Europe and the rest of the world and the Caribbean, and had to actually shut down. So everything basically basically came to a halt. We had restricted activities as relates recreational activities, because normally the persons will go to the beach in the morning to have a nice swim, in the afternoon have a nice swim, but they were restricted. We were talking about the local community. Increase in social isolation. What actually happened is that everybody basically had to stay at home. Luckily, the fishers were able to still do what they need to do. Interruption in transport, so all transportation services were halted. The good thing about it is that we were able to get goods and supplies coming in through the port. The necessary measures were actually made, that the team was at the Port Authority to ensure that everybody was actually doing their actual social distances. And psychological impact, imagine being locked into a house, and I know many of us being locked into a house or locked into a small environment. I wouldn't say prison, how it could be. So one of the things I will say, one of the things that the fishers and the ocean users have actually commended the government of Montreal for, is to just allow persons the fishers to go out and bring in fish supply for food and nutrition, and also to ensure that they maintain their health. So I say, as emerging challenges that are coming in, coastal and ocean pollution, one of the things that is happening is that there's a significant push from the ministry or the government of Montreal to increase farming. But as you will realize that once you increase farming, you'll have to do a lot of agricultural activities in the highland, and what happens at the top of the mountain ends up into the coastal environment and beyond. Conflicts between beach users. You have the fishers who want to actually do, you'll see it in the next slide, who want to do certain activities, but persons who are actually just basically given opportunity at 5 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock in the morning, and to be conflicted with fishers who have gotten a few things and stuff, a few opportunities. So there were some conflicts, changing in government priorities. Yes, I heard my colleagues said that everything was COVID. It was actually tourism. And I will say at this juncture that we need to see the oceans as the key priority going forward. It's no longer tourism because we don't know when tourism is going to come back. Endangered, vulnerable wildlife for us is now our turtle season. And with allowing persons to go on the beach, well, we always do, but it's now conflicting between the endangered species and the population on the beach. And it's very nice to see. Sorry I didn't show pictures, but it's nice to see persons on the beach just relaxing themselves and just getting demand for construction material. I would leave that for another forum. Inadequate ocean policies and law, and that is one of the things that within the region and even within some of overseas territories that we do have. And I heard Andy and some of the other colleagues indicated as relates to the Blue Belt program. I know we've set some recommendation forward so that we can follow up on. Restricted funding, yes. Some of the funding agencies who for Montserrat who was supposed to do certain things, even as relates to even students who were supposed to actually come to do some research and stuff. This have been delayed for until the third phase of COVID has come. Limited political will, and I actually have said limited political administrative will. And as some of my colleagues previously spoke, they basically indicated that persons are now focusing on COVID. But however, we need to focus on the ocean, and they may have the intention to see the marine environment as essential. However, everything is COVID and tourism. But one of the things is that we all see through all our discussions is that tourism will no longer for the next 2 years be the important driver of our economy. Next slide. So opportunities to, okay, so from a government and Montreal standpoint, and I think that is.
Owen, can you just wrap up as quickly?
Yes, and this is just the last slide.
I'll stop interrupting.
Yeah, is the basically the bottom line is updating our so with all the slides and all what we've been saying for the morning is basically saying that we need to have, this is just the perfect opportunity to ensure that our legislative framework is in place to manage all activities within our ocean space. And if we go back from the Blue Belt program last year and taking some of the recommendations coming forward, and Abby, I've heard you spoke, I heard everybody spoke, and we have said we need to get our policies because it makes no sense for us in Montserrat, and this is why everything is based around the policies. And this is the opportunity for us to move forward. And next slide. Okay, thank you.
That's great, Alan. That's really good. And so that I think there's one particular question that we were just going to ask all of the panelists in relation to Blue Belt. Ida?
Yes, it was the question to all the panelists is what is the one thing that sorry, I've lost the screen. Can you still see it?
Yeah, so it's fundamentally each panelist could they just list out one thing that the Blue Belt program could do right now that would help each of the territories in what they're facing now. And I think as a given, it sounds like getting some assistance to get the policies and legislation and the legislative framework in place would be the key one. But if you can add anything else, that would be really interesting to hear. Just as the last question before we wrap up, because I realize it's 4 o'clock.
Okay, and Montserrat, seeing that I'm still not on the floor, but I will say that going forward for Montserrat, And it is the legislative framework, because without policies, without laws and regulation, no matter what we want to put in place, would never happen. And I will say that from a government standpoint, and we are dialoguing with the OECS as it relates to ocean governance. So unless we have policies in place, we would never be able to move forward. And as it relates to SDG 14 and UNCLOS, as it relates to how we use our marine resources.
Lovely.
Okay, if my colleague in Monstrat is done, this is Abby Virgin Islands. I would say while legislation is key, I think that experienced fishers that existed prior to COVID-19, we're seeing them form stronger groupings. We're seeing them participate more in enforcement. They're keen to support research, but we're having neighboring foreign IUU fishers as well as the locally recently unemployed affect what is going to continuously be their sector once those persons return to their livelihood. So there's a very real possibility that when these people return after COVID-19 eases, we're gonna lose a lot of things that we don't even know what we've lost. And so for us, I would say that being able to really have that scientific research that support to understand the current environment and really know what we have, the value of it, and what we stand to lose, particularly as we house many of those resources for the UK that, you know, we're not really in a position with our current resources to be able to protect from that standpoint. So any support or resources that may be offered to avoid that, I think would be the priorities for the Virgin Islands.
Thank you, Abby. And Kathy from Anguilla, are you still on the line? Should be at.
I'm here.
Lovely.
Hi. I just I typed all of my feedback in the chat, but I was saying that we do need legislative assistance with amending legislation. That I think, I guess that would be one of the first ones. Like I said, we've been putting measures in place for better protection of the marine parks. Like we wrote one broad marine parks management plan, and we then did one specific for the Prickly Pear Marine Park and now one for Little Bay Marine Parks, but we don't have the legislation to support the management plans.
Lovely.
So yeah, the legislation needs to be amended. And of course, you know, we need other resources like vessels and vehicles, etc. But of course, the legislation is a big one.
That's great, Catherine. Tim from the Caymans, could you?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks everyone, a fantastic set of talks. Get back to the Blue Belt question. Yeah, we obviously don't have this, some of the issues that a lot of our neighboring territories are facing. We don't have an economy that's dependent on fisheries. It is an important part of the culture and artisanal thing, but in terms of an economy, it's not a big input. So for me, and certainly for the department, the Blue Belt's an interesting thing, because if it wasn't for AMDEEP and MCS, we'd know very little about it. The UK is pushing it, and I know it's an option available, and I was fortunate to be able to go to the Falmouth Blue Belt presentation, which was amazing. But our government, and we're finding it very difficult to get them interested in it, are not. So I think help in trying to raise the kind of political profile of Blue Belt, the options and what's available from the UK would be instrumental. I don't know how we do that. It's the same problem with, you know, this kind of top-down approach where it goes to the minister, then has to go to the ministry, and then it comes to us, which usually means it doesn't make it all the way down. So any assistance with that, we'd love to get our EEZ boundaries sorted out. You saw that slide that Amdeep presented at the beginning. We haven't formalized it with Cuba. We do actually have it with Honduras. I might have to correct that slide. I put a mistake in there, but we don't have it agreed with Jamaica. As soon as we get those sorted out, we can move forward to making some meaningful kind of pelagic protected areas, which I think would be really useful. So definitely moving forward, assistance with trying to raise the profile of Blue Belt and its opportunities that came in with the government.
That's great. Excellent. Thank you. And just from Turks and Caicos, Kathy, are you still on the line?
Yes. I think for the Turks and Caicos, one of the main things that, we're always looking to do is continue on with our protected areas. Now's obviously a time when, yes, we're looking at our IUU vessels that are coming in and how we can curb those kind of activities. So, we're looking for any assistance that way, but we also want to make sure that our protected areas are functioning effectively and not just paper parks. So we are looking at trying to revise our current management plans for each of the individual protected areas, as well as actually write management plans for some of them. So that's always something that we're really kind of needing additional support for. We're very limited on the number of people that we have. We try to involve stakeholders as much as possible, but it really needs to be kind of headed up by the department and then put out for stakeholder participation. So that's kind of the area that we're really needing some assistance with.
That's great. Excellent. And Shannon, I don't know if you want to just add your 2 pennies in.
Yeah, basically pre-COVID, there were limited resources for marine management. In this new reality, there's even less resources. I think now is really the time to build stronger relationships between government bodies and non-government entities. There's a lot of really great resources, and I think everybody's kind of feeling excluded. So somehow getting past that, I think there's a lot more that we could do.
Excellent. Okay. So some really excellent points from the panel there, just rounding up around Blue Belt, and apologies that we've run over, but each of the talks was really good and really interesting to see some of the parallels and also some of the differences between some of the overseas territories and how they're dealing with the current COVID emergency, and also how they're dealing with some of their ongoing issues, which have just been compounded by the current pandemic. So thank you very much for all of our speakers. Thank you very much for joining us. I think we peaked at just about 100 participants and panelists altogether, which is pretty good. And thank you for the Marine Conservation Society for organizing this and giving us an opportunity to share this platform through SAIM, which is great. There is a recording. There will be a link to the recording being circulated. So just keep an eye out for that on your email. Every participant and panelist should get that link. And I think what we should do is post as much news as we can on social media about the event, highlighting the fact that there's a role here for Blue Belt and getting Blue Belt up the agenda. So thank you very much for everybody's interest. And I think that is that.
And thank you very much as well. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Ian. And all the best. Bye-bye.